You're driving down a two-lane road in South Florida, and I mean South Florida. The kind of road where the trees stop being trees and start being walls. Walls of mangrove, walls of sawgrass, walls of something that looked like it was designed by a committee that hated cars and secretly wanted you to turn back. And then you don't turn back because something happens. The walls open, the road widens, and suddenly you're rolling into a place that looks like someone took a small southern fishing village, a Prohibition era rum runner's imagination, and a misplaced government building and shook them all together like a snow globe over a swamp. There's a white neoclassical courthouse sitting in the middle of all of it, grand columns, crisp white walls, the kind of building that belongs on a town square in Georgia or the cover of a history textbook, except behind it, mangroves. And behind those mangroves, about 10,000 islands that have been swallowing boats, hiding secrets, and keeping them since before Florida was even a state. You've arrived in Everglades City, population somewhere around 400 people, depending on whether it's a tourist season or whether anyone's currently in federal custody. And what a story this place has to tell. So let's go back, way back, to a time when a man looked at one of the most inhospitable corners of North America, a maze of waterways, mosquitoes the size of small aircraft, and heat that can convince a reasonable person to reconsider their life choices, and said, yeah, this is where I'm going to build my empire. His name was Barron Collier. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because his fingerprints are on basically everything in this part of Florida. The county, named for him. The city, built by him. The highway that made it all possible, funded by him. When everyone else ran out of money and nerve, Collier was a Tennessee-born advertising genius. Not advertising like we think of it today. He made his fortune selling ad space inside streetcars, which means every time somebody rode the trolley and stared at a poster for soap or medicine, Barron Collier got richer. He was, in essence, the original man who figured out how to monetize the thing people were already looking at. And then, in the early 1920s, he turned his gaze south. Collier acquired vast tracts of land in southwest Florida, eventually becoming the largest individual landowner in the state. We're talking about a land holding so enormous it had to be measured in counties, not acres. In 1922, Collier bought this tiny town of Everglade from the Storder family, a place that at the time consisted of a little bit more than a handful of families, some mosquitoes with territorial ambitions, and a very good fishing club. Collier didn't buy it because it was convenient. He bought it because of what it would become and what it could become. Everglades was laid out as a modern town with a grid of streets centered on a city circle, similar to Washington, D.C. or Paris. Among the amenities Collier provided were the county courthouse, now City Hall, a library, a laundry, and an inn with a department store downstairs, a theater, and a bank. Let that sink in. A department store in a swamp in 1922. This man brought a trolley, electricity, a hospital, a three-story department store to a place that just years before was accessible only by boat. But all of that was just really the preamble, the overture before the main event, because Barron Collier had one obsession above all others: the road, the Tamiami Trail. The name alone has a music to it. Tampa to Miami, Tamiami. A 273-mile ribbon of pavement that would slice right through the Everglades, the largest subtropical wilderness in North America, and connect two cities that had, up to this point, been essentially marooned from one another. Before the trail, if you wanted to get from Tampa to Miami, you went north to Orlando and then back south again, which, if you've ever driven through Central Florida on a hot August afternoon, was its own particular flavor of suffering. The other option was a boat trip that was, and this is a technical term, absolutely freaking miserable. So, the idea of a direct cross peninsula highway that had been floating around since around 1915. The limestone was deep and the conditions sweltering. The project ran out of money multiple times. It wasn't until 1923, when Barron Collier provided funding, the project began to gather steam. Collier just didn't invest in the road, he became the road. A crew of only 15 men began construction of the trail in Collier County in 1923, progressing at a rate of only 4/10 of miles per month. If laid end to end, the sticks of dynamite used would stretch from Jacksonville to San Francisco. By January 1927, the crew numbered 310, 4/10 of a mile per month. Do that math. These men were fighting solid limestone under a thin layer of swamp in 95-degree heat, with alligators, snakes, and mosquitoes showing up to the job site uninvited every single day. The floating steam dredge they brought in for the water sections promptly sank on arrival, which honestly feels like a metaphor. And yet, on the morning of April 25th, 1928, with flags flying, the first automobile in the Tamiami Trail motorcade, carrying Florida Governor John W. Martin and Barron Collier himself, started over what was called the Magnificent Ribbon of Pavement in Tampa, officially opening the 273-mile highway. Thomas Edison was there. Henry Ford joined the motorcade in Fort Myers. There were bands, barbecues, rose petals dropped from airplanes, and fireworks. It was Florida's moonshot, and Everglades City was its launch pad. Collier also built 4 gas station convenience stores along the route and created his own private police force to patrol the highway. The troopers rode spiffy Harley-Davidson police motorcycles and wore bright red jackets inspired by the Canadian Mounties. Red-jacketed motorcycle cops on Harleys patrolling a road through the Everglades in 1928. You can't make this up, and you don't have to, because it actually happened. But then, as tends to happen with grand plans, the world moved on. The Depression arrived. Commerce shifted. Hurricane Donna paid a visit in 1960 and left the town in shambles, destroying 153 homes in Collier County. 2 years later, the legislature moved the county seat to East Naples. Everglades City was no longer the capital of anything. The big dreams were over, or so it seemed. Now, here's where the story takes what we might diplomatically call a pivot. After the road era, after the Depression, after the hurricane, the people of Everglades City went back to do what they'd always done. They fished. Stone crab, mullet, pompano, snook, tarpon. The 10,000 islands, that labyrinth of mangrove channels, hidden cuts, and shallow bays stretching along the southwest coast of Florida, was one of the greatest fishing grounds on Earth. If you grew up here, you knew these waters the way a city kid knows their neighborhood. And that intimate generational knowledge of a watery maze that was essentially unnavigable to outsiders, well, it turns out that skill set is versatile. When the feds banned commercial fishing in Everglades National Park in 1985, the town found another niche. With its little airstrip, isolation, and plenty of fishermen who knew how to navigate the labyrinth of swampy waterways, Everglades City became a major drop site for smugglers. Rather than pulling up crab traps, the local fishermen began hauling bales of marijuana, which they called square grouper. Square grouper. The name alone is a work of art. The bales were wrapped in burlap, roughly rectangular, and floated just below the surface after being thrown from boats or planes. From a distance, in low light, they look like a little fish. And if you were a fisherman from Everglades City, already out on the water before dawn, already known to haul heavy things out of the dark, what was one more catch? At the operations peak, they fished upwards of 75 tons of marijuana a week out of the river of grass, keeping many townsfolk gainfully, if not legally, employed. 75 tons a week. Some smugglers averaged between $15,000 and $75,000 a job, with that number eventually climbing to $500,000 and even $1 million per load. And here's the part that makes this story human rather than just sensational. There are about as many drug addicts among Everglades City smugglers as there are alcoholics among Appalachian moonshine runners, which is close to none. Both groups viewed their activities as a way to make a living in a place where there weren't many other ways. These were people with a specific skill, navigating impossible waterways in the dark, and someone showed up willing to pay them very, very well for that skill. What would you do? Don't answer that. So, it was 1983. More than 200 federal agents, a third as many people as actually lived in Everglades City, entered the tiny Gulf Coast hamlet surreptitiously in the early hours and made simultaneous arrests across the town. They put up a roadblock on State Road 29, the only road in and out, then boarded boat after boat, seizing and impounding many of them. 14 fishing boats, 2 small planes, and 500,000 pounds of marijuana were seized, along with $5 million in various assets. 200 people were arrested, from a former Florida Supreme Court justice down to 3 brothers from the same Everglades City family. The DEA's raids in 1983 and 1984 led to the arrest of almost 80% of the city's adult male population. 80% of the adult men gone. Think about what that means for a small town. Think about who's left. Think about what the dinner table conversation is in Everglades City on any given night in 1984. In total, more than 580,000 pounds of marijuana, with an estimated value of more than $252 million, were seized, along with cars, boats, and property worth more than $5 million. The newspaper headlines from the time read like dispatches from a fever dream. 200 agents raid Everglades City for pot smugglers. Pot bust may mean end of town's economy. End of town's economy. That wasn't hyperbole. That was the question on the table. Here's the thing about Everglades City that gets left out of the documentaries and the DEA press releases and the breathless newspaper coverage. The town didn't die. It was supposed to. By every metric of conventional civic wisdom, a community that loses 80% of its adult male population to federal prosecution in a 2-year span should not survive. It should fold. It should become a ghost town with a very interesting Wikipedia page. Instead, Everglades City just kept going, quietly, the way it always has. The fishermen who remained, and some who served their time and came back, went back to fishing. Stone crab, mullet, the eternal rhythms of a life lived on the water. The town didn't reinvent itself so much as it rediscovered itself. Today, Everglades City bills itself as the stone crab capital of the world. And the stone crab claws from this stretch of coast are, by essentially universal agreement, extraordinary. The kind of food that makes you understand why people have always been willing to do difficult things to live here. The Rod and Gun Club, the century-old lodge on the Barron River that once hosted Barron Collier, Eisenhower, Nixon, and assorted American presidents who needed somewhere quiet and wild to disappear, still stands. is dark Pecky cypress, milled right from the Everglades, still lines the walls. The courthouse that Barron Collier built is now City Hall. The old laundry he built in 1927 is now the Museum of the Everglades, which is free and which will give you a better education in Florida history in 45 minutes than most textbooks will in 45 pages. The Calusa, the Seminole, the escaped slaves who found safety in the Everglades when nowhere else was safe, the pioneer settlers, the gator poachers, whose sons became marijuana runners, whose grandchildren are now crabbers again, layer upon layer upon layer. As one local historian put it, this is a quiet fishing village with a ton of history. But the people here don't see it as history. They don't see it that way because that's their lives. There's something quietly poetic about the arc of Everglades City. A man with a wild dream and a streetcar fortune comes to a swamp, lays down a road, builds a town from scratch, and names a county after himself. The road opens Florida. The town booms. The depression comes. The hurricane comes. The county seat leaves. The fishing economy fades. The crab traps get creative. The feds arrive. The town staggers. And then, because this is Florida, and Florida does not do things the conventional way, the town gets back up. It's still there, right at the end of State Road 29, past the last gas station, past the point where most people give up and turn around. Bring your appetite. The stone crab claws are worth the drive. Bring your curiosity. The history is worth even more. And if you happen to see a bale of something floating in the water that doesn't quite look like a grouper, well, that's a story for a different podcast. And now, you know the whole catch. This has been Drive Thru Towns. I'm your host, Andrew Wilcox. A special thanks to Chloe Jones for providing our music. If you enjoyed this journey, please follow the podcast to stay updated on all our upcoming episodes. To keep the conversation going, you can connect with me on Instagram at 50 State Family. Find me on LinkedIn under Wilcox Legal, or reach out directly via email at wilcoxlegal@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next road.
'Cause I was wandering free on an American dream with a million things to see and do. But it's all good, I'm fine. Had the time of my life, 'cause I did it all. We